So here I am with the iconic Green Party MP, Caroline Lucas, MP for Brighton Pavilion. Hiya.
Hi, nice to see you.
Right, how would you describe the political situation we're currently in?
Bloody dangerous, I think, actually. I think it's really scary because I think the way in which Boris Johnson is just kind of ripping up any kind of rules that have ever been there before, the way in which the Constitution has just been shredded to the extent that you can shred an unwritten Constitution, which is obviously part of another set of problems. But I just think these are really scary times, and I think people are out there deliberately whipping it up even further, making people even more angry, making people scapegoat each other even more viciously. These feel like times I've never known before, and it is dangerous.
How did we get, do you think, to this point? Because this didn't come out of nowhere.
It didn't. And I think it's just been a really toxic combination of different issues. So you've got the anger that rightly responded to the austerity that has hit the poorest people hardest. I think you've got obviously the rise of a particular kind of right-wing politics through Boris Johnson and keying into that kind of populism that is spreading across Europe as well. What Brexit did, I think, was to uncover what was already there. I don't think there was, something that Brexit suddenly created. It revealed a massive democratic deficit, a massive lack of connection and understanding between different parts of our four nations. And when people woke up on the 24th of June and said, oh my God, I don't recognise my country, then there were loads of people who hadn't been recognising their country for a very long time. Why are people in work, working really hard, dependent on food banks? That's not the way it should be. That wasn't the way it was meant to be. And I think what makes it even more scary is that people are stoking it even more. And just over this weekend, I can see from a polling point of view why the Lib Dems might have adopted their latest policy of ignoring the referendum and just saying, no, we're just going to completely pretend it didn't happen and turn the clock back. But that, I think, is massively dangerous too, to add that into the mix. That sense that people have that they're simply not heard. And what better way of giving people a real slap in the face is saying, no, you weren't heard, and we're not going to listen to you now.
So I was sceptical about another referendum, but I now think there's no alternative. But it's going to be really nasty, isn't it?
I have a lot of sympathy with that fear, but I think the bottom line is that from where we are now, I can't see any good ways out. There are no good ways out. I certainly think that the Lib Dem way out is arrogant, self-indulgent, cynical, and very dangerous, as I've said before. And I think that will just put fuel on the fire.
It seemed that this shift by the Greens towards becoming more allied to the Lib Dems, like the so-called Remainer alliance.
Challenge this
well,
thing,
I'm going to ask you about.
You've been on about this on Twitter.
I'm going to ask about it.
It's just not true.
Which is this idea? The Remain alliance, this idea of Green candidates potentially standing down to support.
And why isn't Labour part of that? We are banging on Jeremy Corbyn's door, begging him to talk to us, begging us to get round a table, begging him to be part of an alliance that would properly have a good chance of beating Boris Johnson.
But before I ask you about that, how can the Lib Dems, given the terrible austerity, the assault on disabled people, the onslaught on the social fabric, which led to this situation, how could they ever be seen as allies?
Sadly, under first past the post, some kinds of arrangements need to be made with parties that are not quite as bad as some of the others. If we want to get rid of Boris Johnson, and however bad you paint the Lib Dems as, and I agree with you, they are not as dangerous right now as Boris Johnson, in my view, and this Conservative government. And therefore, if there is a way of being able to find some agreement to have some kind of alliance, and I would love Labour to be in there, believe me, to mean that we were not consigned to another 5 years of a Boris Johnson government, I think it's irresponsible not to do that. And that doesn't mean for a second that you are overlooking the vast areas of policy that I massively disagree with the Lib Dems about.
But the Remain alliance, let's see how this would work, because Jo Swinson, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, has made it clear that the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister is completely unacceptable to her. She will never ever support Jeremy Corbyn.
And I think, and let me just say, in case people didn't see it, in case you didn't see it, I've made a personal plea on video begging her to think again, because I think, again, that is just playing to her own gallery and not putting the public interest first. She hasn't said nearly as much about how much she wouldn't want to work with Boris Johnson than she has about Jeremy. The idea that Jeremy is a bigger threat to this country, a bigger bogeyman to this country than Boris Johnson is just for the birds, what planet are people on?
But the point is that destroys, surely, any sense of a Remainer alliance, because whatever Labour does, the Lib Dems are saying we don't want you anywhere near us. We're never going to support you. So whatever Labour does, that's just a no-starter, because the Liberal Democrats will never stand down to support Labour candidates.
That might be the point at which we've arrived, and I think Jo Swinson's position has hardened considerably in the last week. Before that, though, for example, Labour, as you know, didn't get involved in any kind of progressive alliance in 2017. The Green Party, I'm very proud of the part we played, and frankly, we paid a high price for it. So I still think there are conversations to be had, and I think those are the right conversations to be having, much as I wish that we weren't having to have them. I wish, frankly, that Jeremy Corbyn would embrace electoral reform. I've had conversations with him about trying to push him to do that, because I think for as long as Labour isn't pushing a fair voting system, then I don't think they can say they're for the many, not the few.
Climate emergency, we only have years to stop potentially a catastrophe enveloping human civilization. So that's not great. What are your key demands now? What are the key 3 big things that particularly Labour needs to be committing to that they're not committing to, for example?
Well, I'm interested to see that Labour is now talking about a much more ambitious climate reduction target. The Green Party's position is net zero by 2030. I know that's being discussed by Labour, but it will take us back into what kind of economic system that we're pursuing. And I think for as long as, partly driven, I think, by the unions, Labour has got a very sort of expansionist growth policy, then there's going to be that tension. I think that sense of emergency, so we need to see, a COBRA meeting instantly. What the government's doing is the equivalent of dialing 999 and saying, can I have, the fire engine in 30 years? We need to see real emergency now. So what I would love to see is someone in the Treasury with a climate minister there who has the brief across everything. I want to see a Future Generations Act.
If Labour offered you that position, would you take it?
Well, that's a question.
I know. That's why I asked it.
Well, I suppose it depends what the rest of the Labour manifesto was, because collective responsibility means you've got to sign up to the rest of it.
But potentially you would?
Potentially I would, yeah.
I feel like now I've suddenly appointed myself the job interview for you becoming climate emergency minister. But in terms of, because I think the Greens have had an impact on Labour on Brexit and on the climate emergency. What are the other things you'd like to drag them on?
The bit that often gets lost is the nature crisis. That's the other side of the climate crisis. We talk a lot about climate and getting our emissions down, but we talk less about, rewilding, but also you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with IPPR and others who are calling for like a Sustainable Economy Act.
In a sense, do you think you could end up victims of your own success? That other parties now are kind of competing and throwing, Labour are shifting under that kind of that pressure of those movements, that the Green Party would just end up redundant?
Well, we have always said that if the other parties genuinely adopted all of our policies, we would be very happy to go back and tend our much neglected allotments and everything else. But
there'd be loads of allotments then,
a lot of allotments. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, because I think the important thing is constantly keeping up the pressure and moving the other parties.
In terms of the election that is likely to happen, maybe in November, what are the stakes in that election, and what do you think might happen?
I think what might well happen, given the dark arts that Dominic Cummings is so well known for, there is every possibility that the Tories will win a majority. I want people to vote Green, but if they're not voting Green, then obviously I want them to vote Labour. I want them to vote anything that is not voting for Boris, and another 5 years of this absolute hellish politics that is tearing apart our communities, setting people against one another. Meanwhile, the planet burns.
Well, those are the stakes. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Cheers, Connor, that was great. Cheers. Bit bleak at the end, but a necessary wake-up call. It's always nice to see Caroline and chat to her. We don't always agree on everything, but I think she's a very passionate and committed voice in British politics. But I want to hear your thoughts about who we should talk to next. Hit us with your ideas. We're going to be going to Labour and Tory conference, which I think will be particularly interesting. I don't know what I did in a past life, but my word, am I paying for it? Anyway, as ever, leave your comments and thoughts, subscribe. I'll see you next time.